mate. How you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. We were just saying off mic there. When the last time we spoke was here in the Garden Cinema, I think, like face to face when you came to watch Censor, and we did a chat there.
Yeah, the only time I've ever been here.
Yeah,
Yeah, and the little screen.
yeah.
Screen is here.
There's two. Well, there's three now.
All right.
And there was two at the time, but
Right.
we did a little cinematologists there.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're up in London. Is it connected with the new film? I don't know how much you can say. You know what I mean?
I'm not supposed to say much, but
Okay.
I mean, the film's been announced, and the first look image has gone out, and the
Yeah.
principal cast has been announced, and there's a synopsis that's out.
So it's called Rose of Nevada,
Rose of Nevada. Yeah, I finished it on Friday.
right? As in the like a complete edit kind of.
Everything's finished on Friday. I mean, I mean, it still needs to be approved by everybody, but
Right.
we've put the final film up for approval now, so that's why I'm in London, because I've got a bit of time.
Sure.
I've been there a year pretty much every day,
Right.
working on it since we went into prep about a year ago. So it's been non-stop. Didn't even really stop for Christmas. So yeah, it was just felt a good time to come up and
working with George Mackay,
yeah.
who I've met, is a really, he was in the Screenplay Film Festival.
All right.
And he was on my other podcast, The Cinematologist. Really nice guy. How was he to? I'm assuming he was great to work with.
Yeah,
You know?
brilliant. Yeah, I mean, he's exactly what you'd
Yeah.
imagine. Just the loveliest guy, incredibly talented,
Right.
incredibly hardworking, and just got to know George
Yeah.
really well, and it's become a really good friend.
Oh, that's
So,
great.
the fact that he's in the film is like he's like the added
Sort of bonus to it. Yeah. Absolutely.
And Callum Turner as well, same. Just
Yeah.
Callum's become a real close friend as well, and just lovely,
nice.
Lovely families, and that we've got to know. And
Yeah.
they were both in Cornwall for a long time over the summer, and they hung out with us at the house.
Oh, that's
and,
great.
And we socialized a lot, and it's just kind of continued. It's just sometimes you work with people, and then they come into your life for a couple of months and then disappear.
it, yeah.
But it was quite. I think because they both relocated for the film, for the entire shoot, and for some of the prep, rehearsal period and stuff. They were in Cornwall for a long time, and they brought their families with them. So yeah, it was never going to be a case they were just going to disappear out of our lives again. So it's
Sure.
and now we're getting to the point where we're getting ready for the film to go out into the world. Then it all ramps up again. So I'm actually seeing them tomorrow. I'm screening the film.
Oh, great.
For the two of them tomorrow, because they haven't seen it. They've seen versions of it or segments of it when they came down to loop their dialogue. So George came down in October and looped his dialogue first, and then Callum was the last one to do his dialogue. He did his in end of January, February.
Right.
So I always loop. They always do their looping to a black and white version of the film. So they've seen an incomplete black and white version of the film in segments. So neither of them have seen the complete version.
So is this post synced in the same way as Bake?
Yeah.
And it's made, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's going to have that sort of, off kilter sound. And, it's difficult to describe what that is. I mean, maybe you do better than I can.
Yeah. Well, in the past, people have said there's an uncanny element to the film, which is the slightly out of sync dialogue.
Yeah.
Which I bristle at a little bit, because I do try and get the dialogue in sync. It's not like a creative decision to make the dialogue out of sync. But this time we worked in a sound studio this time. So Ian Wilson's the supervising sound engineer, and we worked in his studio. So everybody came in and voiced in his studio. So it's probably a little bit slicker than before, which I hesitate to say, because I think when we put the first look image out, it was quite a slick image.
Yeah.
And I got quite a lot of angry messages.
Have you sold out, Mark?
Yeah.
Right.
From people saying, somebody sent me a message that said, it was a direct message to me, but it said, "Oh, so he's shooting digitally now." as if I wasn't, it was a direct message just to me. Oh,
Right,
you're
okay.
shooting digitally now.
Yeah.
Somebody else said I was a sellout. Somebody sent me a message saying, so you're not even recording your own music anymore.
Right.
And that was based on one still image with no context. So I do, yeah.
It is
I don't
weird how
want people
people
to-
have ownership
Yeah.
over like you and your shooting your decisions as a
Yeah.
filmmaker.
But I like that. I think it's fine.
Okay.
That's the audience. I do.
Yeah.
I'd be less annoyed if I wasn't getting some sort of abuse.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I'd
I'd be more annoyed if I wasn't getting some abuse. But
I have that thing where the perfect film for me is the one I'll go in and I'll watch and everybody else walks out and I'm the last one left. It's, oh, this is just for me, obviously.
that might be this one.
Well,
That's
maybe.
a joke. Yeah, that isn't true. In case the sales agent
Yeah.
is listening. But yeah, I think it's undeniably my film.
Right.
Because people have told me that. People who've seen it have said, "Wow,
Oh, that's
it's
great.
you definitely made this." Because I don't know, because I'd
Mm.
look at it and I always think that my films look the same as everybody else's films because I'm blind to what I'm doing, really. But
But the thing is, you're working here in a bigger scale, I would say, than before. I mean, you're on, you had a set and everything like that. But
yeah,
and I don't want, obviously, I don't want to get into kind of like the more um, administrative questions of creative control and stuff like with execs and stuff like that. But I don't know how much you were thinking about that. Where this is bigger, but it's going to be still mine. The authorial sort of sense of that.
yeah, no, and I don't think about it at all. It went into it in exactly the same way. We had bigger, a more high profile cast. The rest of the cast hasn't been announced yet, but there's other bigger names
Okay.
in the film. I mean, not bigger names than George and Callum necessarily, but bigger names overall than I've worked with before.
Yeah.
But the process was exactly the same. It's shot on a Bolex H16 hand wound
Right.
camera. It's shot on the same stock that I shot Enys Men on. It's the same process. I cut the film myself. I was responsible for all the sound design, which was all done in post, and I've done the score. So nothing at all changed in terms of the way the film was made. There was a bigger crew, but I mean, my camera crew wasn't any bigger than it was on Enys Men. We had a much bigger art department because it's a period film, because it's set present day and 1993. We shot quite a lot on a boat, and we built the boat in the studio. So we had a real boat that we used at sea and in the harbour. Then we built the boat in the studio as well on a gimbal.
Oh wow. Okay.
To shoot all of the below deck stuff. So it's big. It's bigger budget. It's a big. I think the crew. After there's 400 names on the end roller, and we had a key crew of maybe 120 in total, which was probably getting on for 10 times the size of Enys Men.
Yeah.
But in terms of what I was doing day to day, it was exactly the same.
Were you having to trust more, say, to like second, third ADs and stuff like that, and for certain things, so it was out of your mind kind of stuff?
No, not necessarily. Because we still, we had a first. I mean, I suppose the AD department was bigger on this one.
Yeah.
So I think the first AD that we had on this film, Nick Justin, was delegating more or had a bigger team to work with. And we had, we had the bigger departments were like the locations department, production was bigger. So everything was expanded.
Yeah.
But the camera crew couldn't be expanded anymore because I still control everything. So I still operate, I still load the camera. I still, it's still me that's got my hands on the camera at all times.
Yeah.
But, working with most of the same people in the camera team. In the same way. But yeah, other things do get bigger. And like Denzel Monk, the producer, his production department was much bigger.
Right.
Which I think is inevitable because you're dealing with more money.
Yeah.
And you're spending public money. So you've got to be, there's more, you'll be more careful with what you're doing because you've got to be more accountable quite rightly because it's public money. But I think, people who visited the set came in and were probably initially more thinking, oh God, this is a big film.
Sure.
So if they spend an hour there and look at what's
Going
going on the floor, it's no different.
different,
really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with this podcast, I'm really interested in sort of talking about the theatrical experience or the cinematic experience in the broadest terms of that. And we've watched quite a few films together, and you've been on the other podcast, The Cinematologist, quite a few times, and I've read and listened to other interviews that you've done. Um, and I'm always kind of in awe of, and have noticed quite a lot, that when you begin to speak about a film for the first time, like say with The Doors or with Radio On that you've spoke to us about, you're always very attuned to the environmental factors that are intrinsic to your experience of the film. You know, where you were, what the space was like, what kind of audience you watched it with, who you might have been with, what you said when you first came out. I'm just wondering if that's something you're kind of very conscious of, or it's just a way to into thinking about what you've seen on screen.
Yeah, yeah, I'm really conscious of it, but that's not to. But I don't understand it. I don't understand my fascination with it.
Right.
I think it's probably worth me looking at it closer, because I think I probably could understand it if I. Because the other thing I'm obsessed with cinemas
Yeah.
as
Me too.
spectators
Yeah.
and football stadiums,
Right.
or not even stadiums, but football grounds. So I think there's a huge amount of
Yeah.
similarity between
Yeah.
the two.
Well, I'm of tennis courts.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And the orientation, even though the dimensions are the same, you know.
Yeah, well, football pitches are mostly the same, and what you don't see on the TV is the bit that's different in every
Yeah, yeah,
ground. So you look at a tennis court, and
Yeah.
you'll have a generic shot of the crowd while there's nothing going on the court, but you don't really get a sense of what it's like to be there. You know, you don't get a sense of what the car park looks like and what the toilets are like and all that, which is like, you know, I just went for a wee a minute ago, and like it's just I went and asked where the toilets were, and it was like up steps and round, and you go in,
And the decor and
yeah, and the lighting and everything like that, and that's the stuff that's I'm not predominantly interested in going into toilets,
No.
but it's the detail and it's the idiosyncrasies of it that I really like, which you don't get. You do get at your own home if you're watching football at home or you're watching film at home,
Yeah.
but you don't, you don't get up in the middle of football match and go for a piss and wonder of the idiosyncrasies of the toilet,
Yeah.
because you're familiar with it. So there is a fascination with going and seeing films in new places and go and watch football in new places. So yesterday, I came up to London last night, and on the way, my local team, Mousel, were playing in Wiltshire and Melksham.
Okay.
So and on a very convoluted train journey to get to Melksham to go and watch Mousel play their last game of the season.
Mm.
And the excitement for me is walking into an alien football ground.
Right.
And I get so excited
Yeah.
by that in the same way that I do with the cinema. You know, and the game yesterday wasn't great because we had to win to get in the playoffs, and we drew and we didn't get in the playoffs. But I'll always remember that because that's a ground I've never been to before. And quite often I'll remember films because it's a cinema that I haven't been to before. So I think there's a fascination with new spaces to experience things in, which partly explains it, but it doesn't explain it all, because also my local cinema, Newlyn, I know that cinema inside out,
Right. Yeah.
but I still get excited about going.
But there's
to see films there.
the familiar, and then the alien, for want of a better word, or the new.
Yeah,
It's just fascinating, isn't it? Because then there is that comparison between the two. This is where I'm used to seeing. I'm kind of comfortable. I know the dynamics of what I've going to experience.
And then
I
my
think
seat.
about it exactly.
Yeah,
You know.
I know what time I can look at the listings.
Yeah.
And it says the film starts at,
Sure.
it says 7:30, but I know I can get there I know the exact minute I can get there, and the film won't have started, and all of those sort of things. So there is that familiarity. But I was in Bath the other day, and I just went into a little cinema. I had a bit of time to kill. I didn't have time to watch a film, but I went and looked at the cinemas. So I'd go in and wander around the foyer and like see what the snacks are, check out the toilets, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I love all of that kind of thing. And books on cinemas and books on football grounds, I could just look at them forever. And even the weird derelict cinemas and all of that kind of stuff. And it's just
the sort of story and history of that, the ruin of it in a sense.
because it's a weird thing to do. If you zoom out from the planet and think of what we are and our random evolution into where we are now, and we've created this thing where we go in a big dark room where you go and all cinemas are different, but if you zoom out of it, all cinemas are exactly the same. It's a big wall and rows of seats and you turn the lights off and you chuck some light at the wall, and that hasn't changed since the late 19th century. And it's such a weird thing for us to have done.
Yeah,
And it's endlessly fascinating.
it is, isn't it? Because also, you know, if you go back to the sort of beginnings of the theatrical experience, the thing that made cinema was it went away from, like, you know, the tents or individual boxes that you look through, you know what I mean? And then as soon as we were able to kind of situate the audience where there was a kind of regulatory experience, and that's a bad word, but you know what I mean? Where everybody knew kind of what the experience is going to be, but it changed a little bit.
Yeah, but
You know,
much.
not much.
No, with a bit of distance, it's hardly changed at all.
No, it has.
No, we settled on a way of doing it, and with it, which is really comforting. And
Yeah.
especially when everybody's saying about, oh, you know, cinema's dead.
I think we were talking about this when we first met, you know, down at Falmouth, you know, it's like, why aren't the students coming to the screenings, you know?
Yeah, but it's not, you know, it's not dead. It's changing. But also it's not changing. The thing that stayed the same is the thing that's attractive to it.
Yeah.
Like when I did the Doors screening for the Cinematologist podcast, I think I did talk about this briefly on the Cinematologist podcast, but I watched that film so many times, I never watched it in the cinema. And what I was looking forward to experiencing was big screen of this very cinematic film and big sound, this beautifully sound designed film. That's all I was thinking about, was I can't wait to see it like that. But actually the thing that was most rewarding about it was the audience. It wasn't the size and it wasn't the sound as much as I thought it was going to be. They were spectacular. But very quickly you get used to that. So the first 5 minutes, like, Jesus, you know, seeing these shots, the amazing, you know, shots looking over LA with the moon superimposed and all of this kind of stuff, and this crazy sort of endless montage of images and sound.
Yeah.
But very quickly you go, all right, you know, it's impacting me, but I'm not constantly thinking, wow, this is incredible.
But you see, you go into it, you start from outside it, look at it as a spectacle, then you're into it then.
You get up on that plane and very quickly you can engage in the story.
Yeah.
Because you stop being wowed by it consciously. Subconsciously, it's still having that effect on you, but you're not thinking about it all the time. But what I did think about more was, it's not that I've seen this film 20 times and never seen it big and loud. I've seen this 20 times and I've never seen it with anybody else. I thought that's the cinematic experience.
So the communality is specific. Yeah, as much as anything else.
And it was really heightened in that instance because I'd programmed the film and I'd selected it. And we did Big Wednesday the year before.
Sure.
And where I live, Big Wednesday's like Citizen Kane. You know, that's
surfer movie.
It's the most important film.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a brilliant film.
Sure.
But it's dismissed as a surfing film. And I think I said in the podcast back then, the great quote that Tarantino said about Big Wednesday, he said, you know, that film's too good for surfers. It's a masterpiece as a film, whether it's about surfing or not.
Yeah.
But where I am, if I program that at our cinema, it will sell out very quickly. And I think a year later, I thought, I'll put the Doors movie on.
Yeah.
Put the tickets on sale, thinking, right, it's going to sell out. And like, even a couple of days before, it was half sold.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, wow. So then I begin to feel a responsibility for selecting a film that might not sell out. So I start feeling bad for Neil and you guys. Oh, I'm going to have this podcast recording. There's going to be nobody in the audience. Start feeling bad for the cinema because I've programmed something that with the attitude of this is going to sell out, and then it hasn't. And then when it did pretty much sell out on the night, you start feeling very responsible for the shortcomings of the film or the questionable moments in the film. So
you were defending, like, for 10-15 minutes the kind of sexual representation, let's say, in the film.
Sexual representation, but also just the sexual content. So you go, and there's a lot of people in this audience who are. One thing I thought there was people in the audience when they first walked in. I thought, oh my God, people have come into the wrong film, because there were people in their sort of late 70s and 80s who were coming to watch the film. I was thinking, they've come into the wrong screen. And then in the Q&A at the end, you realize that these are the hippies of the 60s.
Of course.
Who were, and if Morrison was still alive and he'd come to see the film, he would look like these. But my preconceptions were, oh my God, all
It's
these
funny, you can't legislate for the experience that people are having and what they're bringing to the film.
Yeah,
It's
and
really
in the
hard.
Q&A, they were the people.
Yeah.
People I thought had come into the wrong screening were the people who have put their hands up and were going, well, when I was, when we were demonstrating against the Vietnam War or whatever, and just go, oh right, yeah, of course you're this generation. You're the generation who's frozen in time in this film, or those people who've frozen in time in this film. You're the people who carried on living and grew through past that era and are now able to look back at it. But during the film, I was very conscious of, oh God, now this is another shot of Jim Morrison, shagging somebody else. And then there's another, oh, now he's going to get a blowjob in a lift. And then, so those feelings that I'd never felt responsible for my putting the film on, because I was the only person watching it, or, watching it with a couple of people. So that became suddenly like my squeamishness about certain things that are now maybe an issue. And, like I said in the Q&A after the film, there's a hell of a lot of nudity in that film. There's not much male nudity.
No.
There's a lot of female nudity. And I became very aware of things like that. And that was really interesting, because I wonder, then you start thinking, I wonder if everybody else is sort of feeling uncomfortable about that in the room. And so then you are kind of very aware that you're one part of a mass that's watching this film.
Yeah.
So the bits that I'd never laughed at anything in the Doors movie before, but they're funny bits in the film.
Yeah, there are.
And the humor is amplified by the amount of people in the audience. The end, I cried at the end. I don't think I've ever cried at the end. Not only have I seen the film 20 times, but I know what the ending is. It's also based on a true story. So I knew what the ending was before I'd ever seen the film, but I cried watching it with an audience because the sad bits are amplified.
Yeah.
The exhilaration of the first hour of the film is amplified. So cinematic for me, when somebody says, oh, is it cinematic? My brain thinks cinematic, oh, widescreen. Even
Yeah.
and I don't even shoot scope, I shoot Academy ratio films. But when somebody says, is it cinematic? I go, in my head.
Yeah. We don't think about the psychological or experiential amplification of every element.
If I get beyond thinking widescreen, I start thinking 5-round,
surround. 5.1, yeah.
When really cinematic is, you should kind of instantly translate it as going to the cinema, going somewhere, getting out of your house. That's what cinematic should mean.
Yeah.
And that's why I try and, when people say to me, is it cinematic? And I think, well, a lot of films are cinematic because I saw them at the cinema. After the lockdown, first time I went to Newlyn Filmhouse, I went to see the worst film I've ever seen at the cinema. And I had the best night there. And there was a moment where I was just sat there like grinning from ear to ear. And there's about 5 of us in the cinema. And at one point, quiet moment in the film, somebody opened the door and came into the theater, and all 5 of us in the audience turned around and looked, and nobody came in. It was on the screen, but none of us, we were still watching things in surround sound. We'd had a year or whatever of not watching surround sound, so we turned around, and I was just like, that's the best moment I've ever had in a cinema. And then later on in the film, I was so disengaged from what was going on in the film. I was sort of sat there, and Mary said, what are you doing? You're right. And I said, yeah, I'm counting the speakers. Because it was like, wow, sound coming out of everywhere. So I suppose that was kind of a cinematic experience. But it was like, that was the least cinematic film I've ever seen.
Right.
In terms of thinking about it as being a spectacle. It was just crap. But it was a cinematic experience by going there. On the flip side, I've watched films at home on streamers, classics that I hadn't seen before. Again, probably got into the habit of it during the lockdown when I subscribed to all the streamers, and I've watched stuff, and so what's the fuss?
What's the fuss about? Yeah.
And it might be massive scope,
Yeah.
award-winning sound design, but I didn't watch it in the right context. I remember the first time I watched The Wild Bunch, and I watched it it was when I had COVID, so it was one of my times when I was in the attic for a week, where there was only a small TV.
Those are the days.
So it wasn't even downstairs where we've got a projector and a bigger screen. So I watched on a tiny little screen like this, and I just thought, this is rubbish. And I know it's not rubbish because I know it's a classic. I love Peckinpah. I've read so much about that film, and it was just a real gaping hole in my in the sort of my watching of classics and Peckinpah. And so as I was watching, I was thinking, this is rubbish. The film's not rubbish. The way I was watching it was rubbish. It wasn't made to be watched like that. It wasn't made to be watched big on your own. It was made to be watched big with an audience. So everything's amplified. So the violence feels more visceral because you're reacting off other people's reactions. The sound design, the way he uses montage, the way he uses different frame rates and stuff like that. Everybody's reactions to that is amplified. Everybody's, everything's bigger or more emotional or more appalling or whatever, but watching it on a small screen, it's like, this isn't cinematic. It's not the film isn't cinematic. The experience isn't cinematic, and the experience of watching it can render a cinematic film uncinematic.
I wanted to go back a little bit and ask you, do you remember the first film you saw in the cinema?
It probably wasn't the first film I saw, but I remember seeing a Jungle Book in the Regal in Wadebridge. I went with my mate and my mate's dad, and he was a smoker, and we sat in the smoking.
Oh, see, I know there's a smoking side of the cinema. Wow.
So I've got a very visceral memory of that, but I'm pretty sure I must have been to the cinema before then, because I don't think my first cinema experience would have been going with my mate and his dad. But I remember there was where I lived, it was quite remote, and we had the Regal cinema in Wadebridge, which was about 5 miles away from where we lived. But in those days, 5 miles was
longer than it seems now.
Yeah, I don't think my mum even had a car at that point, so I don't think we would have gone to Wadebridge that often, but there was a village hall called the Institute in the next village, and I remember seeing the David Lean version of Oliver Twist there on 16mm, where I sat, and I remember the projector because I ended up sitting quite close to the projector. I watched some of the film and most of the projector because I was just
fascinated.
Which I think that night was the moment for me that.
Yeah. Well, that was my next question. It's actually the mechanics rather than seeing something on screen particularly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that both, it's the two together. I wouldn't have sat there if the projector was just going around and it wasn't projecting anything, but I think I kept looking at the screen and then
thinking, how did that get to there, kind of thing.
Following the dust in the light back to the thing, and then this thing whirring away next to me. So I think that's probably chronologically my earliest memory of watching a film.
Right. And did you have a kind of sort of social induction? Like, did you go with your family? Did you have a group of mates who went regularly and you were like, we've got to go see this, we've got to go see that?
Yeah, we would have, weirdly in Wadebridge where I grew up, the video shop opened up next door to the cinema. It was a little bridge, but just the other side of the bridge between the cinema. There was the cinema on the left and the video shop, and we would quite often go to the cinema and watch something, and then go into the video shop and then get a video out, because my dad was a school teacher and he'd take the school video player home at weekends, the science department video player, and we'd have that at weekends. So if I was at my dad's house, quite often we'd go to the cinema and then go and get a video and then go home. And so that's always been a weird thing with me, because I always associated video shops with cinemas and watching films at home on video with going to the cinema, because they were next to me.
Yeah.
So I've never had that idea that the two were ever in competition.
That's really interesting, because I think a lot of people make that separation, but I had the same thing where it's kind of like there was always a relationship, but even watching something on TV, you're like, this is an event. I remember when Empire Strikes Back was on Christmas Day for the first time. I was like, that's it. There's an entire day around it.
Check what the afternoon film is in the Christmas radio show by the Radio Times is. You get it and you sit there and we did it this Christmas, circled everything, and we were going to watch. Didn't watch any of it.
Yeah.
Because we're out of that sort of way of doing things. But certainly growing up, you'd go to the cinema to watch what had just come out, and the theatrical window was long enough that you would catch everything you wanted to see. And it was long enough that you knew that it wouldn't be in the video shop for at least a year, maybe 2 years by the time in where I was in Cornwall before a tape turned up that you could get. So I watched a lot of stuff that came out in the 80s, and then I was watching stuff that came out in the late 70s because that was what was in the video shop. And they kind of went hand in hand. So that was my culture of watching films, completely uncritical, obviously. So it was all American. You know, I don't remember ever watching a British film.
No, you mean.
You know, British films were invisible or
Yeah. Or a bit kind of naff, you know what I mean? So there was
wasn't old enough to
yeah.
watch sort of acclaimed British stuff.
Sure.
And then the unacclaimed British stuff was shit versions of American stuff that were just better made and funnier and more assured and felt like proper films. But then I think that the sweet spot of going to the cinema for me was from being about 13 or 14 up to about 16, where it seemed like everybody from my school in that age group would go to the Regal in Wadebridge every Friday night.
Yeah.
It didn't matter what was on. You just go.
You just went.
Because you wanted to be out of the house, because you had freedom to go out, because you were old enough to knock about on your own on a Friday evening, but you weren't drinking.
Yeah.
Probably, you know, from my point of view, probably getting interested in girls. And that's the brilliant way to go to the cinema, because you could ask, you know, you could go to a cinema, see a girl, and brilliant, sit there in the dark for 2 hours, not having to say anything, so not even, you know, and then go, went out on a date, sat in a dark room for 2 hours until I was watching something. But that's all part of that. I think that's part of that. Certainly for our generation, that was that rites of passage, and then to kind of.
I think that maybe that's something that certain notions of the theatrical experience, or more the idea of the cinema as a hub, you know, a place where people went, you know, as a social kind of venue, as kind of, that's something I think that's been lost, although it is coming back now. I mean, I would say going down to Newlyn, but we went to a gig there. Do you remember? And you said to me, "This is going to be the new cinema." I was like, because it was like kind of a ruin in a way, but that's had a massive impact, hasn't it? You know, in terms of the area, but also, you know, you support a lot of screenings that you bring to different venues around Cornwall.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was so exciting when they said they were going to. Susie and Alistair said, "Oh yeah, we're going to buy the old Turner's fish place and turn it into a cinema." And I'd always known it as from a kid as the Coombe, that bit of Newlyn was where all the fish merchants were.
Right.
So like there's Harvey's, the shellfish people, and then Turner's was like smoked fish and everything. So it seemed really incongruous to have a cinema there. But the reality of it is on directly opposite, there's the Newlyn Meadery, which is a restaurant. That was the old cinema. So that was the Newlyn Gaiety. So there was a cinema in Newlyn for a long time. My dad grew up going to that cinema. But that was in the heyday of cinema, you know. My dad's 80 odd. So I suppose he, you know, there was TV when he was growing up, I suppose, just, you know, in the 50s. But actually going to the cinema was very separate from TV. So that cinema would have been full all the time, I imagine. It was a flea pit. So it would have been, everything would have gone through there. It would have been cheap to go there. So people with not very much money could go to anything. Cinema's very different where it sits in society now. But despite that, it was like, this isn't as incongruous as it first seems to put a cinema there. What seemed weird was that they were going to somehow fit a 2-screen cinema within this quite small building.
Incredible how they've done it.
And a restaurant that's not small, because obviously the restaurant is the thing that subsidizes a lot of
the other stuff, of course. And then there's all films,
the losses you play when you're rating the cinema. But then it opened I think they've just had their 9th birthday, so it was Good Friday 2016, I suppose it must have been. Was it 2016? Seems like it's been that longer than that. But anyway, I remember going to see High Rise. Was the first time I saw it.
Okay, Ben Wheatley film.
On the Good Friday, which I'll always love that film. And I don't know whether I love it because of the film, or I love it because of the experience.
Right,
Again,
that's
it's
it,
so
that's-
mixed up with the cinematic experience.
Yeah.
I will never have it. I wouldn't, I'd never say that. Oh, I like that film because I went to see it in the cinema that day. But I can never separate it from that excitement of going. There's a cinema 400 meters away from where my studio is in Newlyn that I can just walk down the hill to and go to whenever I want. That excitement that weekend was just incredible.
Yeah.
And in fact, the next couple of weeks, if I was coming down into Newlyn, I would ordinarily to go out of town. I would drive along the seafront from Newlyn to Penzance out. It's the easiest way to go. I would get to the bottom of the hill and turn left, so I could drive past the cinema to check it was still there, because it was. I don't believe that we've got this cinema, so it just seemed like a dream. But they, I think that's that's a real example of where cinema is, that they're still there. And and Alistair and Susie are now good friends of mine.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't ever say, they're doing really well. It's really easy. I think running a cinema is it's kind of crazy thing to do. And it has to be a compulsion as well as a business, I think, because it's like running a hotel. You're there not 24 hours a day, but you're on call kind of 24 hours a day, but it's still there. And I think if it was, it must be sustainable.
Yeah.
And that's that's credit to them, that they've built an audience who keep coming back.
Yeah.
They survived the lockdown. And they came back when a lot of cinemas didn't come back.
Yeah, I'd love to do an episode down there with this podcast, especially on the venue.
Yeah.
So that'd be great.
And I think they've invested in their audience, and I think the audience needs credit as well, because I know people who go and watch everything. I've got a good friend of mine, Anna, who'll just go and watch everything, and that really reminds me of my Friday night viewing.
So there's a cultivation of like community support. They realize what they've got, because I think that's actually quite telling, and probably for independent venues, absolutely key.
I think you've got people there who are complete cineasts who've got no idea they're cineasts,
Right.
because they see everything.
Yeah.
But they don't think about it like that. It's just part of their routine to go to the cinema or go to the pictures, whatever their sort of term is, based on, how old they are and where it is in their sort of their kind of routine. But it's just what they do. They go to the cinema. And it's also, it's also another place where you can go that isn't the pub.
Yeah.
Which I mean, if you live in London, it's quite difficult to sort of appreciate that sometimes. But until very recently in Cornwall, there's not a lot of places you go in the evening, unless you live in the big towns, that isn't the pub.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But if you're not a pub person, and a lot of those pubs, if the only place to go in the evening is a pub, the pub then tends to be something, it's not like a rowdy pub. It does tend to sort of cater for the community. But it's still a pub where, got a certain feel to it and a certain thing. And, I mean, I don't drink. I get out drinking like 14, 13 years ago or whatever. So I stopped going to the pub when I stopped drinking. For a long time, I didn't go out because there wasn't those places to go to. So to go to the cinema, to have a cinema very local that's as close to me as the pub is, pretty much, and go and watch a film or have a cup of coffee at 8 o'clock in the evening, which is like, you'd have gone, if I'd said to somebody that 10 years ago, I went out and had a coffee, at 8 o'clock in the evening, they would have thought I'd been to France, not Newlyn.
Yeah.
Which is, and some of that's all tied up with a sort of gentrification of the Olmo and stuff like that. But there's some sides of gentrification which I think are positive, that is culturally, things that we borrow from European culture, I'm all for. But so I think there's that, people coming out of their houses and going out and doing stuff in the evening that isn't going to the pub, or even going to a restaurant, or whatever. And I think, like, also after COVID, there was a lot of talk about people have got out of the habit of going out, which I suppose is true. I don't know, it's a pretty ill-informed example I'm giving here because I don't know what the data is. But from my experience, it's like, as an introvert who takes quite a lot to get me out of the house, actually having been through something like COVID, I did want to go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'd be more.
But it's weird, isn't it? Because I think if you look at the data, that we've never got back in any tourist or leisure venue. They're all down still, and
But
cinemas are the worst.
But going to work,
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
offices.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course it is.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
I used to love coming to London. Coming up from Cornwall to come to London. Part of what I loved was getting on the bus and seeing all the commuters and everything like that, which is the very thing I hated being part of when I lived in London and was desperate to get away from. But I loved the sort of, you know, it's like when you get in, like when I've been to New York, I went there to New York first as a tourist and hated it because I just felt like I was in everybody's way.
Sure.
Everybody was shouting everything out of the way. I was like, okay, I want to stand here and look at that building that I've seen in movies. The times I've been back to New York since then, it's always been with a film, and I'm one of those people who's like getting annoyed with people getting in the way. So I love the kind of the commute and the bustle and the routine of a city. And the cinema numbers things is weird, isn't it? Because when I did the tour, the preview tour with Enys Men, I went around for like a month, going all around the country, different cinemas. And every night I was in a different town talking to a different cinema manager and different cinema staff and saying, you know, "Oh, how's the cinema getting on? You know, my obsession with cinemas.
Yeah,
What's it, you know, how much money you made this year? You know, are you all right? You're not gonna have to.
I'm gonna survive. Yeah,
You're gonna survive." And I'd have all those conversations, and every other person would be like, somebody would say, "Yeah, no, it's great. We're, you know, really healthy. You know, we're almost back to where we were," or, you know, all this kind of stuff. And then the next one I go, "Oh, it's awful." So, and a lot of that's the personality of who you're speaking to, whether they're glass half full or glass half empty. But also a lot of it is based on what you're comparing it to. Because actually what I've heard is when the cinemas went into lockdown and they all closed, they were having the best quarter they'd had for a decade or something.
right. That's interesting.
Because Bait was in the cinemas.
Yeah.
That's not why they're having them.
Of course it was.
So they know.
Yeah.
Because that was at that same time. So I was looking at the figures all the time. The BFI were telling me about the figures.
Right.
Places that I was going to when Bait was in the cinemas were telling me, "Oh yeah, you know, this is the best." I always think the cinema owners are a little bit like fishermen. No matter what the state of their finances are, they're always, "Oh no."
Yeah.
Maybe that's, I can totally understand why people do that, because you don't want to give the impression that everything's great. But I think if you look at the figures, some people would be saying after COVID, they were saying, "Oh, you know, we're 80% back to where we were when we shut in beginning of 2020." But 80% of where they were, some people were saying, was really good, because that was as high as the decade average before.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Again, it's another really long, it's an ill-informed answer. But from what I think, if you want optimism about it, it's like, think about where we were in 2020, and if it wasn't for the pandemic, which you can't you can't ignore what the pandemic did.
Yeah.
But in terms of people going to the cinema and the quality of films, that, you know, it is all subjective, but it can only really be judged by how many people are going to see them. I mean, culturally we seem to be doing quite well, and if everything's still down, then you should take some comfort in that. If everything else had recovered except cinema, then you go, well, that's okay, maybe it is disappearing out of the culture. But if everything's still down, then
I mean, again, it's
kind of less to
you
control.
hear different things from different people and you know, different sources in that sense. So I think I mean, you know, I'm definitely going to do an episode where I just look at the stats basically and what people are saying. But you mentioned Bait there, and there must be something kind of lodged in your kind of consciousness and your mind about the Berlin screenings of Bait, because I remember when you emailed me, you said, "Oh, we're going to be on at the Film Palace," and I just went, "All right, I'll say I'm coming. I say I'm going to jump on that bandwagon." You know what I mean? And we had that night where, and I was up on the balcony. I haven't been on a balcony for God knows how long. Right at the back, I was just like, "This is unbelievable," and I've still got the video somewhere of your Q&A for that, because I came down the front and just videotaped it. You know, but that must still be there as an amazing moment to be in these cinemas with your film, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that was, again, just being in this, I'd never been in a cinema that big.
Yeah.
Let alone the world premiere of my film at Berlin.
Yeah.
And we were staying in the hotel opposite. and we went by train, so we spent
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, you were like,
a couple of days.
couple of days getting. Yeah.
I think we travelled up from Cornwall, spent the night in London, and then got like on the Eurostar, so like the early Eurostar, and then we got into Berlin in time for the screening, and we just had time to go to the hotel, get changed. And I remember being in the hotel and looking out the window, and I think I'd got ready, and I was waiting for Mary, and we had this little hotel suite, and I looked out the window, and I said to Mary, "Geez, there's something going on over the road at the cinema."
Yeah.
I said to her, "I wonder what else is on. You know, what are the other film?" Not realizing it was a single screen
Yeah.
theater. Because again, I wasn't used to. If you had that much space, that would be an 18 screen cinema.
But you think you don't compute, doesn't it, these days? Where you're like, there's a place that has one screen and it's like 1800.
Well, it's like going back to Newlyn. When Newlyn was being designed, they could have made a one screen cinema or a two screen cinema. The one screen cinema would have been bankrupt in a fortnight. Two screen cinema, suddenly it's a viable model to a sustainable model. But yeah, I looked out the window and I said to Mary, "I wonder what else is on." She said, "Yeah, I don't know. So it must be something big." And then we walked across the road, and then we just joined the queue to go in. And then people came out and said, "You got to come in." I said, "What's the other film?" They said, "Well, it's a single screen cinema." And I was like, "Yeah," and that.
Yeah.
And I've had moments like that since, but that was the first one. I mean, Cannes was big. Again, I didn't think I'd feel it again in Cannes with Enys Men, but because we'd been in lockdown and me and Mary hadn't left Cornwall for 3 years or whatever, and then the one time we left was to go to Cannes, and not only to go south of France, having not left Cornwall for 3 years, but go to south of France and to world premiere the film that I wrote and directed and she starred in.
Yeah, that is mental.
Doris is for that. So it kind of, thanks to the lockdown, I kind of had that moment again because everything got reset,
Yeah.
Because we had the big thing with Bait where we premiered in Berlin, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then won the BAFTA, and then it went back into cinemas again. So even after the BAFTAs, it got bigger again. Then we went down to the south of France where I had the retrospective of my short film work, at a festival in Nîmes. And so everything got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it just went off a cliff. Went back and I thought, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna be like a celebrity." And then we weren't allowed out of the house, and I was like, "Oh, brilliant."
Yeah.
Then when we were allowed out, I was like, "I can go out now, and I'll be a celebrity." And then now you've got to wear a mask, but nobody's gonna recognize me if I got a mask. So it did all get reset, and we got another chance to have that again. But yeah, I mean, Berlin was, in terms of my career, that it changed my life. Sure. Overnight, what happened after that first screening and standing on the stage and thinking, I introduced the film and was terrified, and then an hour and a half later stood on the stage doing the Q&A, and I had no nerves.
Yeah.
And part of that is to do with, I'm very happy talking about me and my work if I'm being reactive to questions. Very comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I'm very uncomfortable with being proactive by getting up and having to introduce something that nobody's seen. But I remember standing on the stage again and looking up, and like you say, it was nuts, and nobody had left. Was the other thing. I mean, people did leave before the Q&A, but nobody left in the film. People said you've got to be conscious it's a festival. People do come, and some people might stay for 10 minutes and then go. Don't take offense. Don't read anything into it. And so I was very aware of that, and nobody left, and it was completely changed everything. And then all off the back of that, all the other screenings sold out. Then they put on an extra screening. There was an extra press screening put on because nobody had been to the first press screening.
Apart from Bradshaw, which was important.
He'd even seen it before.
Oh, okay, right. Sorry.
On a screen.
Right.
And so it was, going and you go out to lunch or whatever with whoever, and then they say, right, somebody would then say, you've got to go because we've got 18 minutes to get there, and it takes 12 minutes to walk there, and then you've got to do this and this, and then you've got to introduce the film. Then you've got to meet these people, then there'll be a Q&A afterwards. It just,
Yeah.
you know, we organized everything to get there. Once we got there and it broke out, that was kind of amazing, going from cinema to cinema and just having that experience. I remember we got the train back, me and Mary sat in the station in Berlin, waiting for the midnight train. We got straight from a Q&A, and we just sat on our bags on the platform, just thinking. Didn't know what had happened, but knew something had happened.
Yeah.
And it was like this, I think things are gonna change. You know, and the film nobody bought the film or anything, but people were just saying, you know, you've broken out of this, what they call a sidebar at Berlin, and people are talking about this film. And and then it just, you know, next thing, just a few weeks later, I'm at the Walter Reed at the Lincoln Center in New York. You know, it's another mythical cinema.
Yeah.
And I'm there introducing the film there, and there was a few moments of like, what the fuck has just happened?
Yeah.
You know, and it went on until we went into lockdown, and then there was another, what the fuck's happened now?
Yeah.
But again, what I feel very grateful for timing wise was that everything that good that happened to Bait happened, and everything was just winding down when the cinemas closed. And then when all the film production was shut down, we got the money to shoot Enys Men, but we hadn't started shooting, so we weren't going to lose the money, and we weren't going to be disrupted in shooting. And then when we'd finished it and were ready to go out, the cinemas were all open, and most of the cinemas that we were going to play in had reopened.
Right.
And then so that next tour of cinemas all over the country was just a joy, because I didn't know, 6 months before or a year before, I didn't know whether any of those cinemas were ever going to open again. And so for me to be there introducing my new film that we'd somehow got made under all of these circumstances to full houses, it was kind of irrelevant to a certain extent that it was my film. You know, it was just a joy being in a full cinema again.